Two competing interests in our province collided ferociously last month. The Ontario government is desperate to get rid of regulations that they say inhibit new home construction for all the people who need new homes. At the same time, many are concerned that that not result in environmental damage to the Greenbelt. At 2 million acres in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, it's the world's largest protected area of farmland, forests, wetlands, rivers, and lakes. The confrontation came to such a head that the chair of the province's Greenbelt Advisory Council and 6 other members resigned en masse last month. Let's find out why, as we welcome, in the Dufferin Grove neighbourhood of the provincial capital, former Toronto Mayor David Crombie, who, as mentioned, resigned as chair of the Greenbelt Council last month. In the central eastern Ontario township of Douro-Dummer, there's Dave Wilkes. He is the president and CEO of the Building Industry and Land Development Association. And in Vaughan, Ontario, Noor Javed is a reporter at the Toronto Star, specializing in 905 municipal politics. And it's great to welcome you three to our airwaves tonight. Happy New Year to everybody. I want to just start by bringing up a map, and I'll describe this in some detail for those who are listening on podcast. But when we talk about the Greenbelt, here's what we're talking about. This swath of land that starts on the south side of Lake Ontario and kind of wraps around Hamilton, going further east around the exterior, the sort of belt of ridings around the exterior of the 416, in through the 905, extends almost halfway across Lake Ontario to the east, and then up towards Georgian Bay and the Bruce Peninsula to the northwest. That's the Greenbelt. You heard me describe the significance of it in the province. And David Crombie, I want to start with you first, because you've been involved in the public affairs of this city, province, and country for more than half a century. So, well, let me put it this way. When a guy like you resigns from an important position like the one you had, a lot of people take notice. What was happening that prompted not only your resignation, but that of 6 of your colleagues on the Greenbelt Council?
At the end of the legislative season, just before Christmas, the provincial government, in a money bill, brought in some changes in Schedule 6, as they called it, changes to the way in which the conservation authorities of Ontario would work. And many of those changes had the effect, in our judgment and the judgment of many others, of limiting the way in which that the authorities would go about their job, and indeed would undermine their ability to carry out their historic work. They've been in business since 1946, and they were brought in at the same time as the Planning Act. It's worth noting that, because land use planning and environmental planning in this province were brought together in 1946 by those acts and by a conservative government, I might say. So it strikes me as that the important thing to remember is that we have in Ontario a unique body known as the conservation authorities. They don't have them anywhere else in North America. And their job is to look after the natural heritage of this province. They are the guardians. And so therefore, when you try and change the way in which it works, and they need to change from time to time, you have to be really careful. The government of the day dumped a whole bunch of amendments on the very last day in the committee. So very few people had a chance to look at it. So we took the position and said so to the minister in our normal way through a letter, that we would appreciate it if they would not continue with Schedule 6 and put it out for better discussion and better review. They chose not to do that. So it seemed to me that what the struggle was going to be on, what's the future of environmental planning in the province, not just in the Greenbelt, in the province, because it's conservation authorities that are affected. And so it seemed to me the best way I could go about it, since I was not making any headway, nor was the council making any headway working on the inside, at least in my judgment and our judgment, it was better for me to resign and carry on the struggle with the government as a citizen.
Okay, fair enough. Dave Wilkes, let me get you to follow up on that by asking, do you share Mr. Crombie's concern that this Schedule 6 of Bill 229 was, in fact, to use his word, undermining the potential protection of the environment in the Greenbelt?
No. First off, Steve, thank you very much for joining. I'm really looking forward to the discussion with Mr. Crombie. Certainly somebody I've admired for the years, and his role as the first chancellor of Ryerson is something that was very important to me as a student and a volunteer at Ryerson. So, Mr. Crombie, it's a pleasure to be here. And Nora, I'm looking forward to chatting with you as well, since we've had the opportunity to speak on the phone. So, Steve, simply put, no, we don't. Let me address the Greenbelt first. our industry position, our association position is that the Greenbelt's off the table. It does play the unique and valued role that you had mentioned off the top. And we also have heard loud and clear from this government that the Greenbelt is off the table, and there will be that the role and size of that very important, significant land feature in our province will remain as it currently is. So I think we can set aside concerns about the Greenbelt and the amendments that the government made in the bill that Mr. Crombie spoke about. And I also do believe that Bill 229 and Schedule 6, and that's a lot of technical terms, but Schedule 6 does relate to the Conservation Authority's role. They had not, that role, those guidelines had not been updated since 1990. And David's right, they have been in place for a long time. And because of that, there had been various interpretations on how the important work of the CAs would be undertaken. There's been variations in the interpretation of that work across the 36 CAs in the province. And we'd seen changes and differences that had led to duplication, that led to work that wasn't the core priority of the CAs being undertaken by them. So we were supportive of the focus that the bill provided to ensure that the CAs work was on those areas that they were intended to be undertaken when they were established around natural hazards. We also support the work of CAs. We have great partnerships with many of the CAs across the province, and they do provide a vital role in environmental protection. But we do think that the bill provides clarity on what that role should be.
This is where I bring Noor in because she's been reporting on this for the Toronto Star, and I ask her. I'm not asking you to be the referee to break the tie here, but you've been reporting on this, and what has emerged from this from this story that you think has captured your attention?
Well, there are many, many things about what's going on that has captured my attention and the attention of, I think, residents and the public. I think one of the things that I have seen is that people have felt, not through just the CA process, but through something called ministerial zoning orders, which had started back in earlier this year, that the government was really issuing planning applications, approving them without the public's involvement, without notification. And that's really when I started to notice and pay attention to what's been going on. And that is just one part of this, all these changes to the Conservation Authorities Act that maybe we'll talk about more. But that's really what I've noticed, that the public and even many municipalities and elected officials are concerned about the way that things are going, because number one, the public is not really in the picture, and number two, municipalities feel that they're starting to lose control of the planning process and the protection of the environment. So that's really what I've been trying to focus on, and where the public, I feel, is really getting involved.
Okay, good. Let me pick up on that. These MZOs, Ministerial Zoning Orders. And I'll ask David Crombie this question because you are a former cabinet minister, so please bring that background to the answer of this question, which is, do you believe that they give the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing too much power to do what he wants in these circumstances?
I think so, but on the other hand, I'm willing to be proven one way or the other. First of all, not to be in the weeds again, but ministerial zoning orders have been part of the Conservation Authority's world for a very, very long time. It comes from Section 47 of the Planning Act of 1946. So it's been with us a very long time. But the big difference was that it was always used in a sparingly way. It was used for very, very important things that were usually of a minor nature, but holding back a big public benefit. And indeed, for years and years, you probably had 2, maybe 4, up to 5 or 6 tops MZOs a year. We've had up to 40. It's now 38 within this last year. So they've moved MZOs from being exceptions to being part of the planning process on a regular way. But it's like daylight robbery, because what it does to it, or nighttime, because it just comes down on you, and there's been no plans, there's been no public discussion, and there's no appeal from them. That's what's getting people upset.
Dave Wilkes, will you grant that the numbers that Mr. Crombie just said seem much higher than in the past? And if in fact that's accurate, and I have no reason to dispute that it is, does that concern you?
Let me put it in some context, Steve. So the MZOs that we've been talking about, and there's a couple points I'd like to pick up on here. The MZOs, everyone that's been issued that's not been on provincially owned land, has been done so at the request of a municipal government, whether that's the local government or a regional government. So the response to the request from the municipal governments to the minister has been what's driving the use of these tools. David's right, they are part of the overall planning process. And when the MZOs are granted, it also, it's not the only thing that is undertaken. Once again, the conservation authorities have a role in permitting and approval within the land that's been designated in the MZOs. So it's to suggest that it's a heavy-handed approach that eliminates all others. I do have a challenge with that. And also putting in context the number that David mentioned, the 38 MZOs that have been issued over the last little while. Looking at the number of permits that CAs across the province have issued, it's upwards of 10 to 15,000. So it is certainly not the rule. It is very much the exception, and it's the exception that is driven by requests from local municipalities to get on with the much-needed growth and development in their areas.
All right,
and
let me
I'd
put
also,
that.
if I may, Steve.
Well, let me just.
May
We're
I-
just
sorry,
running.
Steve.
We're running tight on time, so let me just go to Noor on this one because Steve Clark, who's the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, describes these ministerial zoning orders as, quote, playing a critical role in our province's economic recovery, and they are accelerating priority projects. That's the way he describes it. Do you think that's an accurate depiction of what he's trying to do?
I think that it is serving a need in terms of, increasing the number of long-term care homes and potentially helping in terms of getting businesses moving. I think the challenge really with MZOs is the development that's being attached or in some cases pushed through without the regular planning processes that have been used for many, many, many decades. And I think that's where the problem is. I don't think anybody has problem with long-term care homes being, permits being approved and the process being initiated. But I think it's the fact that it's not just long-term care homes. There's subdivisions basically being approved. There's housing being approved on sensitive lands. There's provincially significant wetlands that are going to be potentially raised over. And so I think that's where people are concerned about. No one that I've talked to has ever said we don't want long-term care. They're just saying the province should have a discussion with us. They should have the public involved. We should have the proper processes in place before these things are issued.
Well, let me put this part of it to David Crombie. The minister says, yes, I use these ministerial zoning orders, and I've done a lot of them, but I do them mostly at the request of the local municipality. I'm not abusing my power. Do you accept that?
Well, this is about environmental planning, and environmental planning works by natural boundaries and not just municipal boundaries. So it's really important to understand that, so that when the minister brings down a zoning order, he's taking a specific spot and changing things. It's not necessarily related to any other environmental planning. And that's why there's a concern. I might say it's worth pointing out that if it was not a problem, then you wouldn't have had the municipal association opposed to it and the farmers opposed to it and a whole bunch of other people who are concerned. What they'd like to have is something that Nora just pointed out. And that is, if you're going to use ministerial zoning orders more frequently, there needs to be a public discussion about where, when, how, and why, not just drop it overnight.
Well, Dave Wilkes, I'm going to put another name on the list of those that Mr. Crombie just mentioned, and that name is Leith Moore. And I know you know Leith Moore because a decade ago he was the chair of the organization that you currently work for. He was part of the Greenbelt Council, and he resigned, saying he was concerned, saying, quote, there has been little engagement between the council and the government over developing policy around the Greenbelt. And he added, the steps taken by the province put decades of excellent work across city and regional boundaries at risk. That is a pretty categorical condemnation from a developer. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so Lee, certainly you're right. Steve was a former chair of our organization over a decade ago. He was appointed to the Greenbelt Council by the previous government, and I disagree with Leith on this one, although I have great respect for him. There has been overwhelming consultation on the various changes that the government is making to the planning process, to the CAs. There is a series of tools that the government has put in place to protect the environment, from floodland management to changes to the provincial policy statements. So I have a challenge where we are not looking at the whole picture, not looking at the whole board. And I disagree on many fronts with the claims that have made that MZOs eliminate environmental protection. They don't. As I've indicated, the conservation authorities within the MZOs land still have the responsibility for permitting and approval. So they're involved in the process. The municipalities, without exception, have requested that the MZOs be issued by the minister. They will be involved. They will undertake the consultations on those developments. And I also have a challenge with suggesting that one form of development may be better or different than another with an MZO designation. There is no doubt in my mind that this is a growing region. This is a great region to live in. We need more housing. We need more commercial development. We need more
in the Greenbelt,
long-term
Mr.
care.
Wilkes? Do you think we should be building housing
No.
in the Greenbelt? No.
And the bottom line on that is no. I said that off the top. The Greenbelt is off the table. MZOs do not apply to land that is within the Greenbelt. And the government has repeatedly said that the Greenbelt will remain untouched.
I know
So
they
we
have
can
said
put
that.
aside-
I know they've said that, but David Crombie, and I'll put that to David Crombie, Steve Clark, the minister responsible, has repeatedly said, we are not monkeying around with the Greenbelt. We are going to protect the Greenbelt. Do you believe him?
I think he's probably believes what he's saying. But it's important to understand that the Greenbelt doesn't exist on some Arctic ice floe. It's connected to the rest of the province. And when you're dealing with environmental planning, everything's connected to everything else. And so what happens on the boundaries and borders, this is what Leith was pointing out, what happens around the boundaries and borders and beyond the Greenbelt affects the Greenbelt. Water flows where water needs to flow. And so all of those things that are connected to environmental planning are not subject simply to a discussion between two levels of government, of politicians. That's why people are upset. They want to participate in the discussion about these MZOs and not just leave it to talks between politicians.
Noor, you have heard what this government has had to say about the Greenbelt and the surrounding area. You have also seen the actions that they have taken. Do you think the words and the actions match?
I think that if there had just been the MZOs and there hadn't been the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, I think many people would not be up in arms, because I think many people do look at the conservation authorities as a kind of, last check to make sure that all the environmental policies and things are being protected. I think the fact that both things are happening in conjunction, these MZOs are being issued, and now we've seen these, pretty dramatic changes to the conservation authorities. I think that is where the concern is. And, I agree with that the conservation authorities will still be there. They'll still be doing their jobs. That, of course, is true. But I feel like the changes are, as people have said, are so significant to the act that it does limit in terms of how much conservation authorities can do, and how much they can protect in a holistic way.
All right, Mr. Crombie, I got to ask you about your resignation and that of all of your colleagues on the Greenbelt Council as well. Not all of them, sorry, 6 of them. And that is, I can imagine the debate you have with yourself. On the one hand, if we stay on the council and fight the good fight from within, we have an opportunity to influence the minister perhaps more effectively, more privately. On the other hand, if we think we can't be a party to this anymore, we have to resign on a point of principle. I get the debate. Why ultimately did you decide, I got to resign, I can't work from within anymore?
Well, the event in terms of 229 and that debate was not an isolated event. We had, over the 2 years that we were in business, we had some 75 different around 75 recommendations during that time. We did not respond, although it may have had an impact on the government. We never had any response. I don't have one formal. We sent 17 letters with some 75 recommendations, something like that. And we never got a formal response. Now, they may have had an impact, but we didn't know that. So when we were very clear about the changes in the Conservation Authority Act and in the MZOs, when they were just in the face of our clear letter to the minister, didn't even bother with it, saying no, just went on. And we thought, well, what good are we doing on the inside? If we're really interested in this, we're better off on the outside.
All right, let's in our last few minutes here just consider, I always like to ask the question in politics, admittedly it sounds funny in Latin, but cui bono, right? Who benefits? So Dave Wilkes, if we do this the way you think it ought to be done, who benefits?
I think there's benefits on many levels. I think there's benefits for the environment because the role and the purpose of the conservation authorities has been made very clear. And let me just quote from the bill, Steve. It really is that the programs and services related to the risk of natural hazards, and I'm reading from the bill, is what they're supposed to be focused on. We have no problem with that. And we think that's a really good focus. There's other components within the planning process, regional municipalities, the flood management system, the provincial policy statement that I mentioned, that also have responsibility for environment. So this is not an attack on the environment. I feel very strongly about that, and I believe that the environment will benefit. And I also believe that there'll be clarity and transparently and streamlining in the process of development. And development and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive. And we had done a study a couple of years ago where there was 52 studies, checklists, and reports that needed to be done and undertake development. It takes 11 years for a development project to be undertaken. And with the growth that we're experiencing, we do believe that there is opportunity for change and improvement. So we think there's a benefit all around, benefit to the environment, benefit to the development process, and ultimately benefit to the residents of the GTA and the province.
Noor, let me get you to weigh in on that. Who benefits with the current approach taken by the province of Ontario?
Trying to be objective here. I do feel like the developers will benefit because from what I've seen, a process of planning and approval that would take many years is now being fast-tracked through the MZO process, almost immediate approval as long as the municipality has approved it. I think down the road, maybe 20, 30 years from now, you could say residents will benefit because there'll be more housing. But I do feel like in the long run, as long as there's development happening on top of provincially significant wetlands and other areas, I feel like many of us will lose out in the end.
Last word to David Crombie. Cui bono, Mr. Crombie.
Well, I think that the public can still benefit. Dave Wilkes is right. We are going to be expanding more. The urban envelope, the urban horizon is going to continue to expand, and that's a good thing. But that's all the more reason why we need to not weaken conservation authorities, but strengthen them. Because in order for it to be really helpful for the public generally and for citizens generally, we need to make sure that that expansion by the development industry is one which is cradled by the environmental processes we put down for it. And what has happened is that they've taken away those environmental, in my judgment, those environmental bases, which will really hurt us with the expansion. I'm for the expansion. I'm also want to make sure that it's got a context of environmental sanity about it.
This is a tough and complicated issue, but I'm really grateful to the three of you for coming on to TVO tonight and helping us understand it better. David Crombie, the former chair of the Greenbelt Council, Dave Wilkes from Build, Noor Javed from the Toronto Star. Thank you three, and Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year, Steve. Thank you. And to you, Dave and Noor.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.